September 2020, the UK is in the grip of the second wave of COVID. Thousands of new cases every day. The government is in panic. There's an urgent need to isolate the infected, trace contacts, break the chain. Every positive test is someone's relative, someone's loved one, a person who right now could be infecting others. And that's why every day, thousands of labs across the country send their data into one main file. An Excel file, a spreadsheet. Everything is as it should be, except no one noticed that the file format was outdated, .xls, and it could only hold no more than 65,536 rows. Each test result used several rows. In practice, one template could only hold about 1,400 cases. And when the number grew, Excel simply stopped adding new data without warning, silently. 15,000 positive test results simply vanished, which meant no one called those people. No one isolated them or their contacts. No one stopped the outbreak. All because of a single file, a single spreadsheet, a poorly chosen format. And this is just one example. One tiny detail, one forgotten symbol, one incorrect format. And that's it. There are dozens of stories like this, mistakes that started small and ended in disaster. And today, we'll tell you about the most unexpected of them, how a single coding error burned through hundreds of millions in seconds, how one bug canceled 5,000 flights and thousands of medical procedures, and why your typo costs $100 million. It was 2012. Knight Capital Group was one of the largest equity traders in the US. On the New York Stock Exchange, they accounted for 17% of all trades. On NASDAQ, 16.9%. A giant in the world of financial services until August 1st, when everything would change in a matter of minutes. Knight Capital operated as a market maker. They would quote both buy and sell prices for the same stock, allowing investors to trade instantly without delay. What does that mean in practice? Imagine the company standing in the middle of a bustling marketplace shouting in both directions. I'll buy for 100, I'll sell for 101. If someone sold to them at $100 and someone else bought from them at $101, Knight Capital pocketed $1 of risk-free profit. They weren't betting on whether a stock would go up or down. The only thing that mattered to them was that people kept trading. Knight simply connected buyers and sellers for a small fee. Now imagine how much money you could make from all of those small fees. In the 2000s, Knight Capital's daily trading volume reached up to 3.97 billion shares. In 2011 alone, the company's revenue was $1.4 billion. Naturally, with such a massive volume of transactions, automation was essential. One fine day, Knight Capital decided to upgrade its software system, but things didn't go quite as planned. Before the update, Knight's servers contained an old piece of code called PowerPeg. It hadn't been used in ages. As part of the update rollout, technicians were supposed to remove PowerPeg entirely. The new update was installed on 8 servers. On 7 of them, everything went smoothly. The old code was deleted. But on the 8th, it stayed. And it wasn't just some forgotten file, it was more like a ticking time bomb. On the morning of August 1st, 2012, the markets opened as usual. The 7 servers worked normally, but the 8th one unleashed a full-blown zombie apocalypse. The unremoved PowerPeg came back from the dead. The system went berserk like a drunken robot with full access to the market. It began placing buy and sell orders in a non-stop chaotic frenzy, as if someone had injected millions of dollars into the market. Other trading algorithms perceived this as genuine activity, and prices started to spike. Penny stocks soared, some rising by hundreds of %, while others plummeted due to the erroneous trades. Orders kept multiplying. Within minutes, the stock prices of over 100 companies shifted dramatically, some by as much as 1,000%. This financial mayhem lasted for approximately 45 minutes until technicians finally identified the faulty code and shut down the server that was running it. But in those 45 minutes, Knight Capital had already lost $440 million. The company's own stock plunged by 70%. It was nothing short of a catastrophe. Why did it happen? Human error? Imagine pressing enter, and with that single keystroke, sinking $1 billion corporation. Actually, better not imagine it. Knight Capital certainly hadn't. There was simply no protocol for such a scenario. That's why the glitch ran unchecked for a mind-boggling 45 minutes, an eternity in financial markets. And crucially, no one had tested the new update once it was deployed to the servers. Why? Because the protocol didn't require post-deployment testing. The result? Another trading firm, Getco LLC, acquired the bankrupt Knight Capital. The merger was finalized in July 2013, forming KCG Holdings, which ironically was later sold as well. So this seemingly small oversight proved to be fatal. And if you think such bugs only happen in the world of finance, think again. Such errors can make rockets explode too. Knight Capital lost $440 million in 45 minutes. How about losing over $10 million every single second? June 4th, 1996. The launch pad at the Guyana Space Center in French Guiana. The European Space Agency, ESA, was about to send its next-generation Ariane 5 rocket skyward, designed to replace the aging Ariane 4. A decade of testing had gone into Ariane 5. Its mission was to deliver 4 cluster satellites into Earth orbit. This was part of an ESA-led scientific program with some contribution from NASA. The satellites would study the Earth's magnetosphere and the effects of solar wind. Liftoff. Ariane 5 began its steady ascent. Engineers applauded. The rocket veered on course. Then, 37 seconds after launch, there was a twist worthy of a Hollywood blockbuster. Ariane 5 exploded before the eyes of stunned spectators. 10 years of testing, a $370 million investment, 4 scientific satellites, all destroyed. Losing $10 million per second is literally astronomical. As the witnesses tried to recover from the shock, an investigation was already underway. And soon it was revealed Ariane 5 was doomed because of Ariane 4? How? Because of a number, a single one, inherited from its predecessor. Ariane 5 had far more powerful engines than Ariane 4. Like all rockets, it tilted shortly after takeoff to reach orbital trajectory. But Ariane 5 tilted much more sharply, thanks to its greater speed, and that aggressive horizontal tilt turned out to be fatal. Here's why. Ariane 5 reused some navigation modules from the old Ariane 4. They were installed under the assumption of full compatibility, but the software algorithm had a number that described how quickly the rocket veered sideways. It didn't define its speed, but essentially its side push factor. In Ariane 4, this value could never exceed 32,767, so everything worked fine. But Ariane 5 exceeded that limit, triggering a critical error. The navigation system shut down. The backup system, it made the exact same mistake. Now imagine, the rocket is flying at thousands of miles per hour, and suddenly, it no longer knows where it is. The computer begins interpreting garbage data as real input. It sends commands to the engines to steer in the completely wrong direction. The nozzles twist, and the rocket begins tumbling violently. Air slams into the rocket at catastrophic angles. Within seconds, the structure can't withstand the stress. It breaks apart mid-flight. The self-destruct system activates and ends it all. The result? A spectacular firework for the crowd and millions of euros in damages for ESA. The Cluster 2 satellites were eventually rebuilt and launched in 2000, but ESA's reputation was seriously damaged. Because of this incident, Ariane 5 launches weren't deemed reliable until 2007. And this avalanche of failure was triggered by nothing more than a single flawed code fragment, and the whole world saw it happen. What about the next infamous mistake? That one was spotted by just one person among millions, but that was enough. Now imagine that the computer you genuinely trust might be wrong, or it might be right. No one knows for sure what its output will be. And no, we're not talking about modern artificial intelligence. This is about the Intel Pentium FDIV processors, released back in 1994. At that time, Thomas R. Nicely, a mathematics professor at Lynchburg College, was writing code to compute prime numbers and their combinations, numbers divisible only by 1 and themselves. Naturally, division was one of the core operations in his calculations. He was using a cluster of computers, including his brand new Pentium processor. Then, something strange happened. He divided two numbers, and the result had a floating point error. Not in the first digit, not in the second, but in the 9th. Seems like a minor glitch, right? But to a scientist, that's like hearing a sour note on a perfectly tuned violin. What went wrong? Inside the Intel Pentium chip was a built-in division instruction. To speed things up, it used a lookup table, essentially a cheat sheet, with pre-computed values so that the processor didn't have to recalculate them every time. Instead, it would glance at the table and go, here's the answer. But 5 cells out of 2048 were filled in incorrectly. So when the processor hit one of those faulty cells, everything went haywire. It was like opening a multiplication table and seeing 7 times 8 equals 0 instead of 7 times 8 equals 56. The processor trusted its cheat sheet when it came to division, but in 5 spots, the answers were wrong. Here's a simple calculation. 4,195,835 divided by 3,145,727. The correct answer is 1.33382044491. The answer from a bugged Pentium is 1.333739069, an error already in the 4th decimal place. Thomas Nicely reported the issue to Intel, but as they say, 2 can keep a secret if one of them is dead. The bug leaked to the internet and the media, and that's when things truly blew up, largely because of Intel's response. First, they admitted they already knew about the bug, and they were even working on fixing it. They downplayed it, saying the error only occurred once in 9 or 10 billion operations, so practically never. In other words, the bug was so rare you could safely ignore it. Who would it affect anyway? Just professional mathematicians or scientists? And how many of them are really stress testing their processors? Well, it only took one, Thomas Nicely. Then Intel said they'd replace the processors, but only for users who could prove they needed high-precision math. Intel even promised to verify if the bug persisted for each specific user. That did not go over well. It triggered a storm of outrage. And after a CNN report, Intel was forced to reverse course. They began offering free replacements for any Intel Pentium FDIV processors. Andy Grove, Intel's co-founder, issued a public apology. The cost of the bug? $475 million. Yes, a single glitch cost Intel nearly $500 million. And if you think that's bad, how about a single missing character costing $18 million? Once again, a launch pad, a rocket, a countdown, and then something went wrong. But this time, the problem came from NASA itself. And the reason was so absurd, it's hard to believe. The program was missing a single character. Let's go back to the late 1950s and early 1960s. The Cold War is in full swing. In 1957, the Soviet Union launches the first satellite into Earth's orbit, and simultaneously kicks off the space race. 2 superpowers, the Soviet Union and the United States, are desperately trying to outdo each other in space exploration. Each wants to prove that its technology is more powerful, its rockets more precise. Every year brings a new achievement: satellites in orbit, the first animals in space, then satellites reaching the moon. A human spaceflight is still a dream, but if we can send spacecraft to the moon, why not to the planets? NASA chooses Venus as the first target. First, it's relatively close, and second, it was quite underexplored back then. So, the agency launches the Mariner program and builds its first probe, Mariner 1. Its mission is to gather basic data on Venus's temperature and magnetic field. July 22, 1962, an Atlas Agena rocket lifts off from Launch Complex 12 at Cape Canaveral, carrying Mariner 1. The ascent goes smoothly until the moment the first stage is supposed to separate. Ground control abruptly lost contact. Now, the rocket is designed to continue its trajectory based on the last set of received instructions in the event of signal loss, so everyone hoped it would stay on course. But suddenly, the rocket veers to the left, flips upside down, nozzles facing skyward, and begins zigzagging wildly off course. In short, it goes berserk. To make things worse, the rogue rocket could crash into busy transatlantic shipping lanes. NASA's range safety officer made a tough call to destroy the rocket mid-air. Then came the investigation, and that's when they uncovered what writer Arthur C. Clarke would later call the most expensive hyphen in history. Although technically it wasn't a hyphen, it was a macron, a tiny overbar that had been omitted. The thing was that the bar would tell the computer that the deviation from course was minimal. It's like it says, don't worry, ignore the antenna data, keep on flying. Without it, the computer treated every small antenna wobble as a catastrophic error and doomed the rocket. But there was still one mystery in this story. After all, the Atlas launch vehicle had been used before, with the same software. So why was the previous flight successful? NASA Representative Orrin Nix clarified this in a 1985 report. The hyphen had been missing on previous successful flights of the Atlas, but that portion of the equation had not been needed since there was no radio guidance failure. In short, the first American attempt at an interplanetary mission failed because of a single missing character. The cost? $18.5 million. And if you think this is the most ridiculous failure in space history, you haven't heard the rest of the story. Sometimes a mission demands vast amounts of time, money, and effort, only to fail right at the beginning. But it's even worse when you're this close to success and then, bam, something truly ridiculous happens. In 1999, NASA set its sights on Earth's planetary neighbor. They launched the Mars Surveyor 98 mission, sending the Mars Climate Orbiter, MCO, to the Red Planet. It was a robotic space probe whose mission was to study Martian weather and atmospheric conditions, measure temperatures, and look for evidence of past climate change. In short, anything that might reveal whether life ever existed there. On December 11, 1998, MCO launched smoothly into space, and 9 months later, it arrived at Mars just as smoothly. On September 23, 1999, the satellite fired its thrusters to break into an elliptical capture orbit as planned. Over the next 2 months, it was supposed to shift into a circular orbit gradually, but just 5 minutes into the braking phase, MCO waved goodbye and disappeared, slipping behind Mars. No one ever saw it again. There was no signal either. The mission had failed, suddenly and with no obvious cause. But of course, there was a cause. And yes, once again, it boiled down to human error. But the sheer absurdity of the mistake was off the charts. Here's what happened. The spacecraft was developed by 2 NASA contractors, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, and Lockheed Martin. JPL's systems used the metric system, newtons, while Lockheed Martin relied on imperial units, specifically pounds force. Just to clarify, 1 pound force equals about 4.5 newtons. Now imagine what a mismatch like that means for a spacecraft's engine control software. The onboard software was written in newtons, but ground commands for thrust were calculated in pounds force. As a result, the satellite was nearly twice as low as intended. It either burned up in the denser atmosphere or slammed into the surface, taking with it the $193 million spent on the mission. All was gone, abruptly and absurdly. NASA's Associate Administrator for Space Science, Edward Wheeler, later commented, "The problem here was not the error, it was the failure of NASA's systems engineering, and the checks and balances in our processes to detect the error. That's why we lost the spacecraft." And also, let's be honest, because no one stopped to ask the most basic question: are we even using the same units? Unfortunately, the second spacecraft from the Mars Surveyor 98 mission, the Mars Polar Lander, which was meant to study Martian soil, also crashed under unclear circumstances. In the end, the entire mission to explore Mars collapsed. But NASA did learn from its mistakes. In 2007, the agency had fully adopted the metric system for all its operations. Because no matter how serious your organization, no matter how flawless your reputation, no one is immune to failure. The next failure also proves that point. You can be a titan of the industry. You can triple-check every part. But none of that will save you if you're off by just 2 microns. The cost? $500 million. And this wasn't just a failure, it was a nightmare, 340 miles above Earth. We're talking about Hubble, the icon of space exploration. Even people who can't tell Jupiter from Venus have heard of it. But did you know that a tiny defect almost robbed it of its most important function? The Hubble Space Telescope is truly legendary. It's been in space since 1990, and the list of discoveries and data it has delivered to scientists is nearly endless. But let's rewind briefly to the year it was launched. So after a series of delays and complications, the Space Shuttle Discovery finally deployed Hubble into orbit. Everything went smoothly, and soon the telescope began sending its first images back to Earth. And that's when scientists were hit with a nasty surprise. Instead of the crystal clear images they expected, the telescope returned pictures that looked like what a nearsighted person might see without their glasses. Blurry and out of focus. After analyzing the images, they identified what the problem was: Hubble's main mirror. Not a scratch, not a crack, but a flaw in its shape. And yet, this mirror was supposed to be one of the most precisely crafted in history. But its outer edges were just slightly too flat. How much is too flat? Just 2 microns. That's 100 times thinner than a human hair. And yet the impact was as if someone had smashed the mirror with a sledgehammer. The light from the center and edges of the mirror focused at different points. The result? Blurred images, a phenomenon known as spherical aberration. The optical contractor Perkin-Elmer, which made the mirror, had made a critical mistake. So what could NASA do? Bring the telescope back to Earth? Live with the poor quality images? Neither option was realistic. One was too expensive. Another was too unproductive. Only one solution remained. If the telescope couldn't see properly, why not give it a pair of glasses? And that's exactly what NASA did. They developed a corrective system called CoStar, designed to compensate for the optical flaw. The first servicing mission of Hubble was designed to install it. December 1993, Space Shuttle Endeavour approached Hubble. Over 5 spacewalks, astronauts performed a complex surgical operation on the telescope. They upgraded tools, installed a new camera, and fitted the CoStar module. Hubble finally achieved sharp focus and got a second life. By 2002, all instruments requiring CoStar support had been replaced with upgraded ones featuring built-in correction. And in 2009, the CoStar unit itself was returned to Earth. Since then, Hubble's been flying without glasses. In the end, that 2-micron mirror defect caused by a careless contractor cost NASA $500 million to fix. But like a hero at the end of a movie, Hubble recovered and began showing us the stars in a way we had never seen before. And that, at least, can be called a happy ending. But the next technical blunder, this time by another well-known company, would cost much more. Just imagine, $5 billion lost because of a mistake that no one could fix. So what exactly went wrong? Imagine this: you're having breakfast, or commuting to work, or boarding a plane. Your phone rings, you lift it to your ear to answer the call, and at that exact moment, it explodes. Sounds like the start of a low-budget horror movie. But in 2016, this became reality for hundreds of Samsung Galaxy Note 7 owners. And yet, it all began on a high note. On August 19, 2016, Samsung released its latest flagship device. The brand new Galaxy Note 7 looked amazing. It seemed to have everything, even iris scanning technology. Demand was strong from day one. and the phones flew off the shelves. But by September 2nd, Samsung abruptly halted sales of the Galaxy Note 7. Alarming reports were pouring in from users. Phones were spontaneously catching fire or even exploding, seemingly without cause. Things escalated fast. The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, issued a formal warning. Passengers were forbidden from turning on these phones aboard airplanes. Safety manuals and bulletins on using these phones began appearing worldwide. Meanwhile, inside Samsung, engineers were racing to figure out what had gone so catastrophically wrong. And they found the answer. What's the most likely part of a smartphone to catch fire? Naturally, it's heart, the battery. But under normal conditions, you'd have to seriously misuse a device to damage it. In this case, however, the battery itself had a manufacturing defect. A tiny flaw caused internal short-circuiting between electrodes. Samsung, fiercely protective of its reputation, sprang into action. They recalled the faulty batch, launched a software update to limit charging of affected phones, switched battery suppliers, and re-released the Galaxy Note 7 with new batteries. The packaging clearly indicated these revised models were safe, and they were, or so it seemed, until they started exploding too. It sounds like a joke, but it was a harsh reality. New supplier, new batteries, same fire hazard. This time, the issue was a welding defect in the new batteries, and again, it led to short-circuiting. Realizing the battery problem was now beyond saving, Samsung decided to halt production and sales of the unfortunate model. Then, it took some time to safely collect and dispose of the dangerous devices. The result? The third quarter of 2016 was a nightmare for Samsung. Profits plunged by a third, and the total losses reached a staggering $5 billion. And just as Samsung was busy putting out literal fires, a new catastrophe was quietly brewing in another corner of the tech world. This time, the culprit wasn't a battery. It was a security vulnerability that the tech giant Microsoft either didn't notice or chose to ignore. On May 12, 2017, thousands of people around the world turned on their computers and suddenly found themselves in a kind of digital version of the Ring. A chilling message appeared on the screen. Your files have been encrypted. To get them back, you had to pay a ransom, $300 in Bitcoin. And you only had 3 days to do it. This was the work of WannaCry, a ransomware worm that scanned the internet for vulnerable computers, broke into them, and encrypted everything it found. Then, like a real racketeer, it displayed a note demanding ransom. In just a single day, WannaCry spread like a digital plague, infecting over 200,000 computers in over 150 countries. And these weren't just personal devices. Major organizations were affected, including hospitals, universities, airlines, and even the governments of 4 Indian states. It turned out that 98% of infected computers were running on Windows 7. Despite global warnings not to pay, many victims did. In total, the attackers earned over $130,000 worth of Bitcoin at the 2017 exchange rate. By today's rates, that haul would be worth millions of dollars. Who knows how long this cyber chaos would have lasted? But just hours after the outbreak began, an unexpected hero emerged. His name was Marcus Hutchins, a British cybersecurity researcher. While analyzing the virus, Marcus noticed something odd in the code. Before launching its attack, the virus tried to connect to a bizarre website, something like this. If the site didn't respond, the virus began encrypting files. But if the site did respond, the virus would shut down. This so-called kill switch was meant for emergencies. Most likely, the creators included it as a way to halt the outbreak if it spiraled out of control. But things didn't go according to their plan. Seeing this strange domain name, Marcus simply registered the website, and just like that, the epidemic was stopped. But how did the virus manage to infiltrate Microsoft Windows systems so easily? The root cause was a vulnerability in the operating system that allowed attackers to access any number of internet-connected computers. here's the twist. The US National Security Agency, NSA, knew about this flaw, but didn't tell Microsoft, because they planned to exploit it for their own future cyber operations. In fact, they even built a piece of exploit software called Eternal Blue to leverage it. Just 1 month before the attack, a hacker group called the Shadow Brokers stole Eternal Blue from the NSA. They weaponized it, turning the tool into a global threat, and used it to launch WannaCry. The IT world was shocked. It became painfully clear just how vulnerable our digital infrastructure really is. Infrastructure that, in the modern world, holds up our economies, healthcare systems, and even human lives. A wave of criticism crashed down on the NSA for keeping silent. But that was just the prologue, because the next major failure came from a company that was supposed to protect us from attacks like these. CrowdStrike, a name once synonymous with cybersecurity. They analyze threats, fight viruses, and prevent system failures. But on July 19, 2024, the unthinkable happened. Imagine this. You simply turn on your computer, and it shows you the blue screen of death. Just like that, for no apparent reason. Now imagine millions of computers doing the same thing. Systems crashed everywhere. In hotels, airports, banks, hospitals, stores, and government agencies. Nothing was working. The equipment stopped responding, refused to turn on. People felt as though they'd stepped into a dystopian nightmare and were on the verge of panic. The failure was instantly called historic in scale. The world was effectively paused, and no one was prepared. And the culprit? CrowdStrike. Well, their intentions were good, but the outcome? The company released a new update for its CrowdStrike Falcon sensor, the software designed to prevent cyber attacks on Windows systems. But due to a bug in the driver, the update rolled out on the morning of July 19th, triggered a critical failure. Once installed, computers entered a reboot loop, displaying the blue screen again and again, a cycle of digital death. At international airports, boarding passes had to be filled out by hand. Medical equipment became useless chunks of metal. You couldn't place an online order, schedule a delivery, or even pay with a credit card. In short, it was a total collapse. When CrowdStrike realized what had happened, they quickly informed affected clients how to fix the issue. But in many cases, recovery took a huge amount of time and effort. In some companies, computers had Windows BitLocker drive encryption enabled. To reboot those, users had to enter a 48-digit recovery key. But what if that key was stored on a server that had also crashed? Of course, CrowdStrike's leadership apologized to the global community, but the consequences were too staggering. Estimates suggest the faulty update impacted 8.5 million devices. The global financial damage caused by the outage was estimated at up to $10 billion. Yes, even companies that exist to defend against cyber threats can make software errors that lead to astronomical losses. But what about you? We've all encountered it at some point, a product of the digital age, and a great tool for scammers. Let's say you're trying to visit a familiar website like YouTube or Facebook. You type the address, hit enter, and something feels off. The layout's wrong. The design looks suspicious. You're staring at a bright, sketchy phishing page. You check the URL. It seems right, almost. But there it is. One missing or extra letter. Seems harmless, right? But it's too late. Best case scenario, you're bombarded with nonsense pop-ups. Worst case, your data is stolen before you even realize what happened. You've just fallen victim to Typo squatting, a scam based on domain names that mimic popular websites by exploiting typos. Some of these pages are relatively harmless. They profit from ad views generated by accidental visitors, but others are highly dangerous, convincingly mimicking legitimate brands. Things may go really bad if a user unwittingly enters their login credentials, or worse, their payment card details, without realizing they're not on the real website. And you can pick up malware simply by visiting it. By the time you realize your mistake, it's already too late, and the losses can be severe. In 2009, typo squatting was rampant on Cameroonian websites. The country's domain, .cm, differs by just one letter from the global .com. 1 in every 3 .cm websites is a fake version of a popular .com website. There have been calls for criminal penalties against typo squatters, but proving malicious intent rather than mere coincidence can be difficult. Still, typo-based domains are estimated to generate hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Not bad for one tiny typo, right?